Hi, my name is Jake, and I'll be explaining my diorama of a World War I German Imperial Army trench. The German Imperial Army trench were often complex, with living quarters below the surface with electricity, beds, and toilets. This differed from the open-air trenches of the Allies. Trenches were 8 to 10 feet deep. Dockboards were laid across the floor to prevent the soldiers from having to stand in mud and water. Water would run along the trench under the duckboards and drain into a sump pit. Water would be pumped out of the trenches. The trenches had rows of barbed wire in front to slow down the attackers, and the open area beyond the barbed wire was called no man's land. Set back behind the trench was a short and long-range artillery, which was used to fire on enemy soldiers in their trenches as they tried to attack. There was a row of parapets across the front, which provide cover when firing. Behind the parapet was a shelf that was used as an elbow rest for the soldiers as they fired their weapons. The Mauser rifle was made of wood and metal with a leather strap. It was powerful and accurate with a long range. It was very reliable, but its long range was not the best for trench warfare. The length of the rifle often was a problem. The German army also used the trench mortar, also known as the Minenwerfer, a short-range mortar used by the Imperial German Army. They were used to clear obstacles, including bunkers and barbed wire. They could do this more accurately than with long-range artillery. They also were used to deliver gas when chemical warfare started. The light version of this weapon could be towed by 1 horse, compared with 6 horses for the heavier ones. Also, it could be moved around the battlefield by 4 men. Stick grenades were also a favorite, known as the Steinhengren, standard issue of the German Imperial Army during World War I. It was called a potato masher in British Army slang. It was easier to throw than regular grenades. The explosive inside was connected to a detonator with a pull cord that came down the hollow handle. To use it, a soldier would pull the string downwards, the fuse would light, and 4.5 seconds later, kaboom! Onto the MG-08 machine gun, also known as the Maschinengewehr 08, Germany's standard machine gun. The firing range averaged 500 to 600 rounds per minute. It used a 250-round fabric belt. It got really hot and was waterproof. It had a toggle lock, and was once cocked, it kept firing rounds until the trigger was released or it ran out of ammunition. Although it was cumbersome in assault, with its heavy water jacket, this machine gun was a very effective defensive weapon. And now, the trench knife. Even though firearms were used extensively, hand-to-hand combat was still an everyday occurrence. The trench knife was used to effectively fight in close quarters. The German Nahkampfmesser was the standard issue German combat knife during World War I. They were conventional, general-purpose cut and thrust knives with blades that were about 6 inches long and single-edged. And finally, howitzer, which you can see here has been destroyed. The howitzer is between an artillery gun, which has smaller, faster shells, and mortar, which shoots longer shells at higher angles. The howitzer was especially effective in trench warfare, since it fires heavy shells at higher trajectory than some other artillery. Steep angle of descent is better suited to hit targets in trenches with large amounts of explosives. The German army had far more howitzers than France at the beginning of the war. Artillery was the most destructive weapon on the Western Front. Thank you for joining me on this journey through world history. I hope you enjoyed this explanation of a German Imperial Army World War I trench.